This is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Karen's voice, shrill with indignation, sliced through the quiet suburban street. Her face, contorted in a mask of fury, was rapidly turning the same shade as her lipstick, a violent shade of crimson. She jabbed a manicured finger towards Marcus, her new neighbor, who stood calmly on his porch, phone in hand. "I demand you change it back this instant," she screeched, her voice reaching a fever pitch. Marcus, taken aback by her outburst, simply raised an eyebrow. "Change what back, ma'am?" "The Wi-Fi password, of course," Karen shrieked, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "It's always been God bless America, and now suddenly it's some gibberish about, she sputtered, unable to bring herself to utter the string of numbers and letters that had replaced her patriotic password. "It's my Wi-Fi network, ma'am," Marcus replied calmly, his voice betraying a hint of amusement. He had been dreading this encounter, knowing his new neighbor's reputation as the self-proclaimed sheriff of their cul-de-sac. He had hoped for a cordial, if distant, relationship. It was clear that hope had been in vain. "You can't just change it," Karen bellowed, her voice bordering on hysterical. "I have guests coming over. Important guests. How will they connect to the internet? How will I finish my online yoga class?" Marcus' amusement morphed into disbelief. This woman was serious. She was actually holding him hostage over a Wi-Fi password, a password he had every right to change. Before he could respond, however, Karen whipped out her phone and jabbed at the screen with a fury that would make a honey badger proud. "I'm calling the HOA," she declared triumphantly, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "They'll set you straight. You can't just move in here and change everything." Marcus' eyebrows shot up in surprise. The HOA. For a Wi-Fi password. This was getting ridiculous. He was about to point out the absurdity of the situation when a notification popped up on his phone. It was an email from the HOA, confirming his registration and welcoming him to the community. As he scrolled through the message, a particular sentence, highlighted in bold, made his jaw drop. The sentence read, "****, as, per community regulations, all residents are required to use the designated Wi-Fi network and password provided upon registration. ****. A slow, knowing smile spread across Marcus' face. He glanced up at Karen, who was still spewing threats into her phone, her face a mask of righteous anger. He cleared his throat, and for the first time since she had stormed onto his porch, Karen paused, her tirade momentarily forgotten. "It seems," Marcus began, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to Karen's frantic tone, "that you are mistaken. The HOA email clearly states that all residents are required to use the designated Wi-Fi network and password." Karen's eyebrows furrowed, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What are you talking about?" She spat, her voice laced with distrust. "Don't lie to me." "I'd assure you, I'm not," Marcus replied, holding up his phone. "The email also states that any changes to the network, including the password, must be approved by the HOA board." He paused, letting the information sink in. "You wouldn't happen to be on the HOA board, would you, Karen?" The blood drained from Karen's face, leaving her complexion as pasty as her favorite foundation. Her eyes darted back and forth, a flicker of panic igniting in their depths. The hand clutching her phone trembled slightly. She stammered, her carefully constructed facade of righteous indignation crumbling. She had been so caught up in asserting her dominance, in putting the new guy in his place, that she had forgotten her own carefully crafted rules. Marcus watched her with a mixture of amusement and disappointment. He had hoped his new neighborhood wouldn't be plagued by the stereotypical HOA busybody, but it seemed his hopes had been dashed before he even unpacked his moving boxes. Before Karen could concoct a response, a gruff voice interrupted them. "What's all the commotion here, then?" A portly man with a face like a bulldog and a matching temperament stomped towards them, his expression a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. He eyed Marcus with open distrust. "You the new fella?" "Yes, I'm Marcus," he replied, offering a polite nod to the newcomer. "Just moved in a couple of days ago." The newcomer grunted, his eyes still fixed on Marcus with a mixture of suspicion and something akin to territoriality. "Harold, president of the HOA," he introduced himself with a curt nod, ignoring Karen entirely. "Heard there was a disturbance." Karen, momentarily forgotten, sputtered indignantly. "Harold Thiz." She gestured accusingly at Marcus. "This man changed the Wi-Fi password. I can't believe he would be so inconsiderate. He even had the audacity to claim the HOA made him do it." Harold, his beady eyes narrowed, turned his attention to Marcus, waiting for an explanation. "Karen." Marcus started calmly, deciding to play it cool, seems to have forgotten about the community Wi-Fi guidelines. "She even tried to report me to the HOA for following them." He offered a nonchalant shrug, as if the whole situation were a minor inconvenience. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Harold, his face now turning a rather alarming shade of purple, raised a hand to silence her. "Now hold on just a minute, Karen," he growled, his voice thick with displeasure. "I don't recall authorizing any changes to the community Wi-Fi. Did you file the necessary paperwork and get board approval for this password change?" Karen stammered, her eyes darting back and forth between Harold's thunderous expression and Marcus's infuriatingly calm demeanor. She began, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Marcus watched her with a mixture of pity and amusement. Her carefully constructed world, where she reigned supreme through a combination of passive aggression and fabricated rules, was crumbling around her, and he had a front-row seat to the implosion. But as satisfying as it was to see Karen get her comeuppance, a small part of him couldn't help but feel a tinge of sympathy for the woman. Her need for control clearly stemmed from some deep insecurity, and he wondered what had happened in her life to make her this way. However, that sympathy quickly evaporated when Karen, with a desperate glint in her eyes, pointed a trembling finger at Marcus. "He's lying, Harold. He must have hacked into the system. He probably wants to steal our identities, our credit card information, everything." She shrieked, her voice cracking with faint terror. "He's dangerous. You have to do something." Harold, however, was not buying it. He'd seen this act before. Karen had a talent for conjuring up elaborate scenarios where she was the victim, usually of some imagined slight or transgression. This time, however, her performance was falling flat. The desperation in her voice was too palpable, her accusations too outlandish. He fixed her with a withering stare. "Now, Karen," he said, his voice low and menacing, "I've known you for a long time. And in all that time, I've never known you to shy away from a good rulebook. So you're telling me that you, of all people, decided to bypass HOA regulations and change the Wi-Fi password without proper authorization? Doesn't sound like you, Karen." Karen's face flushed a deep crimson. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Harold's words had struck a nerve. She prided herself on being the epitome of a law-abiding citizen, the self-appointed guardian of their little suburban utopia. Now, her carefully crafted image was collapsing around her, and she had no one to blame but herself. Marcus, sensing the tide turning in his favor, decided to seize the opportunity. "Harold," he interjected, his voice calm and reasonable, "I understand this is a misunderstanding. Maybe we can just reset the password to the original one, the one listed in the HOA email, and put this whole thing behind us." He pulled out his phone and displayed the email, with the designated Wi-Fi password clearly highlighted. Karen, seeing her carefully constructed web of lies unraveling, let out a strangled gasp. Her eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape route. Harold, his gaze fixed on the phone screen, frowned. "That's not the password I remember," he grumbled, scratching his head. "Been using God Bless America for years." Karen's jaw dropped. She stared at Harold, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He had just confirmed her worst nightmare. He had unwittingly handed Marcus the ammunition he needed. And with a sinking feeling, she knew this was just the beginning. A slow, sly smile spread across Marcus' face. He had been right all along. Actually, Harold, he said, his voice smooth as silk, it seems Karen decided to change the password herself a while back. Probably forgot to file the paperwork, right, Karen? He directed his gaze at Karen, who seemed to have shrunk a size smaller under their combined scrutiny. Her face, now the color of spoiled milk, was a mask of panic. She stammered, unable to meet his eyes. I'd, she began, but the words died in her throat. She knew she was trapped. Denying it would only make her look guiltier, and the look on Harold's face told her he was already leaning towards believing Marcus. Harold, oblivious to the silent exchange, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. God bless America, he muttered under his breath. Can't believe I forgot. My wife's bingo night wouldn't have survived without it. Then, his eyes narrowed as he turned to Karen. Why didn't you remind me, Karen? You know how much Mildred loves her online bingo. Karen backed into a corner, felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had been so used to getting her way, to dictating the rules, that she had never considered the possibility of someone challenging her authority. And now, thanks to her own web of lies, she had become the villain of her own making. I just thought, she stammered, desperately trying to salvage the situation. It seemed like a more appropriate password for our community. Appropriate? Harold echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. What's not appropriate about God bless America? This is a God-fearing community, Karen. We salute the flag, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we definitely don't change the Wi-Fi password without proper authorization. His voice boomed across the quiet street, drawing the attention of several neighbors who had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Karen, mortified, wanted nothing more than to disappear into thin air. But Marcus, ever the opportunist, wasn't done with her yet. Actually, Harold, Marcus interjected, his voice deceptively mild. Karen had a very specific reason for changing the password. He paused, letting the tension build as the gathered neighbors leaned in, eager to hear the latest development in this unfolding drama. Karen shot him a venomous glare, a silent plea for him to drop it. But Marcus, sensing her desperation, only smiled wider. He had her right where he wanted her. You see, he continued, his voice laced with fox sympathy, Karen explained to me that she felt the old password, God bless America, was, and I quote, too inclusive. A collective gasp arose from the assembled neighbors. Harold's eyebrows shot up to his hairline, his face a mask of disbelief. Inclusive? He sputtered, his voice thick with indignation. What in tarnation is inclusive about God bless America? It's our country's motto, for Pete's sake. Ignoring Harold's outburst, Marcus pressed on, his voice taking on a dramatic lilt as he recounted his fabricated conversation with Karen. She said it wasn't welcoming to people who didn't share our values, our beliefs. He paused again, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before delivering the final blow. She specifically mentioned people from, shall we say, certain backgrounds might find it offensive. The air crackled with tension. All eyes were fixed on Karen, who stood frozen, her face ashen, her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. The neighbors, who had always regarded her with a mixture of annoyance and wary respect, now looked upon her with a mixture of suspicion and disgust. This was social suicide in their homogeneous little bubble, and everyone knew it. A hush fell over the gathering, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Karen, caught in the crosshairs of their collective judgment, felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to scream, to deny everything, to disappear into thin air. But the words wouldn't come. Her carefully crafted mask of respectability had shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Harold, his face a mask of thunder, stared at her with an expression that bordered on betrayal. He had always considered her a pillar of their community, a staunch defender of their shared values. Now, he saw her as a fraud, a hypocrite who had been playing them all along. "Karen," he began, his voice shaking with suppressed rage, "I can't believe you'd even think such a thing, let alone say it out loud. This community welcomes everyone, regardless of their background." He glanced around at the assembled neighbors, his gaze lingering on a Hispanic family who had recently moved in across the street. "We don't tolerate that kind of thinking here." The neighbors, emboldened by Harold's words, began to voice their own disapproval. Murmurs of disgraceful, unbelievable, and good riddance filled the air. Karen, ostracized and humiliated, felt tears welling up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words came out. What could she say? The truth, that she had been blinded by her own prejudices, that she had let her fear of the unknown turn her into the very thing she claimed to despise. No, she couldn't admit that. Not here. Not now. Sensing her distress, Marcus decided he had pushed her far enough. He had exposed her hypocrisy, shattered her carefully constructed facade, and shown the neighbors the truth behind her carefully cultivated persona. Anything more would be overkill. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Harold," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I think we've all learned a valuable lesson today. Let's just reset the password to the original one and put this whole misunderstanding behind us, shall we?" He pulled out his phone and once again displayed the HOA email, the original Wi-Fi password prominently displayed. Karen, grateful for the lifeline he had thrown her, nodded mutely. The neighbors, their anger momentarily appeased by Marcus's intervention, began to disperse, muttering amongst themselves. Harold, his anger giving way to weariness, sighed heavily. All right," he mumbled, pulling out his phone. "Send me that email, Marcus. I need to have a little chat with Mildred about online bingo security." As Harold retreated into his house, his shoulders slumped with the weight of the evening's revelations, Marcus turned to Karen. She stood there, small and defeated, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had been exposed, humiliated, and ostracized by her own community. But he also knew that this was a reckoning long overdue. "Karen," he began, his voice softer now, devoid of its earlier amusement, "I understand that change can be scary. But this community, this country, it's big enough for all of us. We don't have to agree on everything, but we do need to respect each other." He paused, unsure if his words were getting through to the woman who had just moments ago accused him of hacking, identity theft, and who knows what else. To his surprise, Karen looked up at him, her eyes filled with a strange mix of shame and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was wrong." The words seemed to catch in her throat, as if she were unused to admitting fault. But there was a glimmer of something new in her eyes, a flicker of understanding that had been absent before. Marcus nodded, offering her a small, encouraging smile. It was a start. A small victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. He turned to head inside, eager to leave the drama of the evening behind him. As he reached his porch, he heard Karen call out, her voice hesitant but clear. "Marcus," she said, "about that Wi-Fi password, would it be all right if we kept 'God bless America'? It's just, Mildred makes a mean casserole, and I promised her the recipe." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe there was hope for this neighborhood after all. "Sure, Karen," he replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "God bless America it is."